The WWH show. This is a show that asks us a series of why, what, and how questions on topics that have national, regional, and global significance and implications. Today we have such a topic to talk about. Why succession plan is very important for continual success of organizations around the world. Here in our studio we have James Alexander. He's a co-author of Case in Government Succession Plan. This is his book, and we're going to talk about succession plan with him in our studio. James, thank you very much for coming by, taking your precious time from your busy schedule.
Well, thank you, and welcome to everyone in the audience. I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you today.
So let's begin our discussion by asking, why should we worry about succession plan? What is the importance and significance of succession plan?
Well, I'm glad you asked me that question because it's a very important issue, and actually it's a crisis. It's a quiet crisis that people are not always aware of. What happens is, you see now, there is so much change going on in the world right now. So many different changes, so many different crises and whatnot. And they're related to a lot of major themes. We see technology is increasing, the use of technology. Just this week, there was a drone that came into the White House and fell on the White House garden. And so they didn't realize that even though they had the airspace around the White House, that had been corrided off. They didn't have any kind of rules or regulations or technologies to stop drones. So that's just one of the examples that you see that there's going to have to be major changes as far as security is concerned, as far as addressing that technology, et cetera. And I use that as an example to say that so many organizations are trying to move along with this nonstop change that we have, but they don't have the leaders in place. Succession planning helps organizations to have the continuity and leadership they need so they can be successful.
It's very important. You gave us a very powerful and impressive background, but around the world we see that great organizations founded by great leaders going to ashes because they don't have successors. There is a very powerful saying which is a leader without a successor is a failure. So the question is, why organizations don't have succession plans, even if it's very critical for their continual success?
Two major issues come to play about that. One is that having succession planning sometimes gets a backstage when leaders have so many crises to deal with. In fact, the term that we use in the field is crisis management. They have one situation after another. To actually put a successful succession planning in place, you have to be able to look strategically. That is, you have to be able to look down the road. So you need this kind of leaders that have that perspective. And then the most important aspect of that, you need the expertise. You need the people who can actually put a succession plan in place. So those are two of the challenges that organizations face very often. They just don't get the opportunity to take the time to really do the succession planning and link into their strategic planning, and they don't have the people, the expertise, so they can effectively do it.
Let's say that there are some people who are watching us talking this, and these people, they want to have a succession plan, but what do you think they don't have right now? Maybe because they are not convinced yet. So what kind of things you're going to tell them that may convince them that, yes, there are very urgent things, things that create, crises, things that are very, very urgent and they have to attend them. But why do you think they should set aside time to develop succession plan, even if they are busy, they don't have the time, they are always caught up with so many urgent things?
Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say you're working on a major initiative in your organization. Think about your role as a leader to make sure that happens. You want to make sure that you're able to successfully reach your goals. But suppose for some unforeseen reason, you're taken out of the equation as a leader. That particular goal that is going to have a major impact on your organization, your stakeholders, and your customers, it's not going to be able to come to fruition. Okay, so that is one of the things that you really want to think about. You're putting all your effort to get the resource together, to get the people together, and then all of a sudden things come to a stop. Now, a lot of situations occur. People have accidents. They leave to go to other jobs. People retire. All of those different reasons. And the other thing that's really important, when we think about leaders in organizations, you have leaders at all levels of organizations, the very top, but you have also technical leaders. You have leaders in technology, leaders in finances, leaders in human resources. I can go on and on. So it's important to have someone, a successor in place, so that you don't lose the momentum that you've developed as you move forward and you try to adjust to change.
So you're saying that the succession plan is not only for the top dog, it's about also the people under him, like some technology or some legal people who need to have successors.
Exactly. The term that we use in the field is those particular areas like technology, like finance, and human resources. Those are what you call mission critical occupations. You just can't run an organization with that particular expertise. And one of the things that we do in succession planning and in workforce planning as well is we develop what's called competency models. These competency models take a look at what the skills and knowledge and expertise that people have at the very top, the very most successful people, how they're able to put those skills in place and be successful, and then develop the kind of proficiency to do that. So once you have a competency model, which is like a map really, then you can train and you can support people to develop behind your top leaders. And these people that you train to bring up in succession planning, we call that your bench strength. And like in sports, you have your starting team, but then you bring in your bench players and whatnot to support them from time to time. So that's what you want to do as far as succession planning is concerned.
I mean, this is a very important point that you mentioned about leaders, they can leave their position because of accident and so on. If they haven't prepared successors, they're going to leave vacuum. That's so true in Ethiopia. For example, because he was not prepared, the Emperor of Ethiopia, Emperor Haile Selassie the first, he was not prepared to have a successor because he was old. He should have groomed someone and should have left the position by giving that power to someone who could have transitioned the imperial regime into something popular.
Let me add to that, because that's a really good point. Think of what's happening right now. Just over in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, the king just died. Okay, yeah. His successor is also very old, and so he might not be around that long. So there's a lot of speculation as who is going to be the next monarch and how long they're going to be there. And one of the immediate questions that they're asking is that successor going to be able to carry on the same policies and procedures, or are they going to go in a totally different direction? So you see, that's a really important aspect. How important is that? The President of the United States stopped his trip to India, the most populous democracy in the world, to make sure that he got to Saudi Arabia to pay his respects. So very, very important issue when you talk about political leaders, you're talking about leaders of countries and whatnot, because they have such vast influence internally in their country and also around the world.
Yeah, it's very important. So in the case of Britain, for example, they have this royal establishment, and then there is also a democracy, the House of Commons, and you can see that they could be able to make that transition very, very smoothly and peacefully. Yes. But the Ethiopian emperor, he couldn't be able to make that transition. He was not ready to have a transition very smoothly, that he was toppled by a coup d'etat, and a dictatorial government came to picture. Since then, the country is not the same. The country has been passing through difficult times in the past two regimes. The same here. For example, I can give you another example in Ethiopia. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia 2 years ago, he died with a very acute disease. And his plan, he didn't have a succession plan, because even if he had, he was thinking that he's going to have 20 years. So he was working very slowly. He culled out everybody he thought competes with him. So he was grooming people who were not ready to take his position. He died accidentally. So they put in place someone who didn't have any experience, any authenticity, or credibility and power. So the Prime Minister in Ethiopia right now, he was not ready. And he's not ready. He's not the one even leading now. Other people behind the scene are leading, because the then Prime Minister failed to have successors. He failed to groom them, develop them, and help them be influential while he was in power. So when he died immediately, they just put someone who was not ready, who was not, in the position to lead the country. So succession plan is very, very important.
Great point, great point. What you're talking about is a situation called on-the-job training, okay? And when you're in a high-level position that's very visible, very influential, you just don't have the time to do that because the impact of decisions that you make are visible to the people around you. So it's important that you have those competencies that you need, that you have the kind of vision that you can see across your enterprise, across your country and whatnot, and the implications around the world, and that you can actually take action, that you can contact people and whatnot. It takes a while to develop that kind of proficiency, and not everybody can do that without the kind of training. Now, one of the things that we look for in succession planning is we look for individuals who are called high potential individuals. These individuals, not only are they high performers, okay, they have the ability to advance rapidly so they can serve their organization, okay, and they can serve their country. So one of the things that we try to do is develop these competency models so we can use that to identify and recruit these individuals and continue to develop their skills and their proficiency. So the situation that you talked about just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Why we brought this is because we want to convince our audience. They may say, oh, succession plan, we have so many crises here. We have so many things to do. We don't want to invest our time, energy, and resources to these things. That's why we gave them some examples, powerful examples that how succession plan is not only important to organizations, even to nations. So the next question I want us to discuss about is why succession plan is different from industry to industry, because the succession plan you need for your country, the succession plan you need for your organization, even your organization, there are business organizations, government agencies, non-profit organizations, and also religious organizations. So the succession plan we're talking about is personal. I mean, it's independent of, it's kind of specific to each industry.
Actually, you could go even further with that. Each succession plan is not only specific to the industry, it's specific to the organization itself, because you have to look at the culture of the organization, how they operate, and then their environment, what we call the environment organizational interface. And let me give you an example of that. In the federal government, where I've done a lot of studies, they have what's called merit recruiting. Okay, that means that only people who have qualifications should be promoted to jobs. Now, in the private sector, if you own a family business and your business is successful, then you'd expect for your son or your daughter or whatever to be the next person in charge of that business. So whatever their skill level, it's regardless, it's not that important. What's important is that you're a family member and you're supporting them. So again, it's a different way of operating. So each industry, if you're talking about agriculture, if you're talking about energy, whatever, they have a different way of operating. And also, they have different individuals who are top-level experts in those specific areas that can be the top leaders. So some of the principles are the same in succession planning, but each one, as I said, operates in a different environment. And you have to understand that environment that they operate and also the culture, that is the way people interact. You know, some organizations, even though they're very large, they still operate with a very small way of doing things. An example of that, I think you might be familiar with the way churches operate. You have some mega churches that are really large, then you have some small churches and whatnot. Now, they're both effective in their own way, but they have their own way of relating to the people in their congregation.
So what you mean that anything we discuss here is very helpful for people to consider having succession plan for their organization, but they have to sit down and study and understand the corporate culture, values, and the people in that organization, where they want to go and so on before they plan for their succession plan.
Absolutely. What you don't want to do is you don't want to take a succession plan from one organization and just dump it into another organization, because it has to be customized. It has to be tailorized to the specific needs of that organization. I've done succession planning in a number of organizations, and sometimes, you know, the goals and objectives that we had in one organization were totally inappropriate to try to take to another organization. So we had to make sure that we took the time to do the research, develop the consensus among the leaders and the stakeholders, and then move forward as far as actual succession planning and the management and implementation of that.
By the way, what do you think are the key factors for us to develop succession plans?
Well, the first and most important factor is you have to have the commitment of the senior leadership. Now, the commitment of the senior leadership can come from being the bottom up. That is, people on the bottom can, verbalize their concern about succession planning, or middle management. I remember one situation, the middle managers were saying, you know what, I can't do now what I was just doing 3 months ago because my chief financial person left. Or my IT person left. So those are the kinds of things that when it's from bottom up. Or you can have a senior level person, the top person in the organization, realizing that some of the initiatives they have right now, that they're planning right now, they need someone to back them up, to support them. So if something should happen to them, that they can have a person that will provide the leadership continuity and to keep their organization going so they can provide the goods and services to their customers and reach their goals and objectives.
So the first thing is commitment, because if there is no commitment, it's not possible to really have succession plan. But what about also the support they need from outside? Sometimes, you may not have the resource within to articulate and finally come up with your succession plan. Should you invite, let's say, consultants from outside and so on and so forth?
Well, since I'm one, I would say yes. That's a great idea.
Maybe contact you. And
I would
you have the
that.
co-author of a very important book, so I believe that they can contact you and get many insights about how to come up with their succession plan. Are there any other factors? Because I'm assuming...
Well, let's explore a little bit about what you mentioned. Putting aside the whole issue of consultants and whatnot, there's a couple of things you can do if you want to do succession planning in your organization. One is that you can have one of your leaders in your organization, have them trained and develop the skills in succession planning so they can be the person leading that initiative. There's a challenge along with that, though, because it takes time and it takes money for them to actually learn succession planning and how to do it well. Learning how to do it well takes expertise and time from dealing with different situations. So if a person's coming up from your organization to do succession planning, that's going to take years to happen, and you might not have that. Now, another option that you might take is you might want to hire a person to do succession planning. There's a challenge with that. First of all, you have to know which one of the competencies that you are really looking for that particular person. Is it strategic planning? Is it change management? Is it human capital management? Is it all of the above? And then at what level do you want that person to operate? Do you want them to be in the human resource department? Do you want them to report directly to the CEO? If they're too low in the organization, they're not going to be able to have the kind of respect and the kind of interaction they need with senior leaders to actually set up the program and be effective. If they're too high in the organization and they have a lot of other responsibilities, they might not give succession planning the attention that it needs. So these are some of the things. You can actually, as I said, you can bring someone up in the organization. It's going to take a lot of time. You can, bring someone from the outside, but they're still going to have to take some time to learn how the organization operates, and you have to make sure that they're positioned strategically so they can do the job well. Or, as we said, the third option is you can bring in a consultant that has experience doing that.
So it's a good point, because the interest to have succession plan is not enough. You have to also authorize people by having policies that back, their decisions, and also by giving them enough resources like finances and also authority, so that they will have the authority it takes to implement the succession plan.
Yes, and let's follow up on that a little bit. One of the things that we found that's really helpful, because so many organizations are going through change now, it's a recurring theme, and is one of the things that we try to do when we're working with organizations is we develop what's called a business case. That business case explains what the challenges are that organization might face, okay, and the implications if they don't do anything to face it. So that's why, the reason why we do that is because some of the challenges around succession planning is kind of implicit. It's not right out in front of you. If a manager or if a leader of an organization is dealing with things day to day, they're not thinking about what's going to happen if I'm not there. You know what I mean? That's in the future, and that's something no one has a crystal ball that they can actually see, that they know about. So it's really important we kind of take a look at that. Develop that business case that really points it out why they should do it. And let me give you an example of one of the situations that I remember. I was working in an organization, and because I was in charge of succession planning and leadership development, every month we gave what's called a management forum. And this management forum, the senior leaders would make presentations about different issues, concerns, policies relating to that organization. So, IT issues, human resource issues, financial issues. One of the presentations that we had dealt with the budget that was coming for the upcoming year. Okay, and the person that you would call the chief financial officer, he made the presentation. Now, the document that he used was very, very thick, okay, and they had PowerPoint slides that go along with that document. And he was providing information about the different aspects of the budget, why it changed, what the goals and objectives were. People were asking him questions. He was fielding the questions and moving along at a very brisk pace, but again, taking time to make sure everyone understood it. Now, some of the people that were in the managers that were there, they were having trouble because there was so much information going along with that. Now, I tell you the story about it because this particular person that was giving this presentation, he retired less than a year later, okay? And one of the things that about that presentation that was even fascinating is legally he was blind. So he wasn't seeing any of the PowerPoint slides. That was all in his head. So imagine what happened in the less than a year time when he left. All of that institutional knowledge, all that expertise that he had developed over his 30 plus years, that was gone. And there was nobody there to replace him. Actually, they hired a person behind him, but the reality is they had three people that were trying to do the same job. And actually, if you think about it, the people that they had, they still didn't have the kind of authority, the kind of relations across the enterprise that he carried from the 30 years that he developed. So that's a real life situation that we're thinking about, that you should think about when you're looking at the work that you're doing. Because one of the major driving forces right now in succession planning is the fact that you have a clash of two generations. You have a clash of the baby boomer generation that are leaving at an incredible rate. Okay, and then you have the rise of what's called the millennial generations, individuals that are within the 20s and 30s that are coming into the workforce. And they have a very different outlook and demographic than the baby boomers. A lot of them have excellent technical proficiency, but they might not have the maturity and the expertise in management and leadership. So you have this one generation that has an incredible amount of knowledge and effectiveness, and they're leaving. And so if organizations aren't able to provide succession planning, knowledge transfer to these individuals, their bottom line is going to be impacted. And it's not just, again, for profitable organizations, it's also for organizations that are providing services, nonprofits as well. So a very important aspect of that.
Yeah, you mentioned a very important generational gap. You mentioned in our community it is so true. Some people may not agree with me. We have this problem where we have, the senior generation that occupies politics, churches, community organizations, businesses, and so on. You see upcoming great generation that has difficulties, for example, to relate, connect, and learn, and finally substitute the generation that's phasing in out. So the senior generation, they think that they're going to live forever. And the young generation, they are far away because they think that they're not ready. But actually, a success of a community is measured how you bridge this gap. the gap between the senior citizens and the young generation. And I see that gap in our community. I don't mean all organizations, but some organizations, they don't really plan ahead of time to make sure that these great leaders now leading the community have successors. So if they don't have successors, if they are not, so why I'm talking about that, because, developing successors is not about you just giving your authority, giving your title. As you mentioned, you have to give them also your experience. You have to give them also your networks. You have to give them your tricks. To do that, you can't just say today you're leaving and say, hey, come and take my position. That's not succession plan. You have to groom them. You have to bring them, give them some positions, let them practice, let them have the authority, let them make even mistakes, and let them learn from you, and slowly let them take your position. I like, for example, ANC, for example. If you see, this is African National Congress, the party of Nelson Mandela. They were so smart that they have this generational gap. They bridged the generational gap. Mandela was a young leader in the ANC. When the time came, he became the senior leader of the organization. He raised people behind him, like Zuma and other people under him. That's why the party is still alive and succeeding. But some parties, especially this is true not only in Ethiopia, in other developing countries, we don't pay closer attention to the importance of successors. Sometimes we want to just give our position to our children. We want to give to our best friends and so on. We don't really think critically. That's why I mentioned about Meles Zenawi. When he died, the second person he was making the successor of that organization was his loyal man, the yes man. So now the country is in danger for me, because you should have a very strong leader who could be able to tap into your networks, your authority, your authenticity. Now, Meles gave the position, of course, without willing. But this person doesn't have the network, doesn't have the authority, the authenticity, and so on. So what do you think about leaders who think that succession plan is all about just giving their titles without,
Well, what you mentioned, I think, is the reason why succession planning is so important. And there's a psychological aspect to that. People don't like to necessarily give their power and their authority, especially while they're using it.
They're alive while they're healthy and well.
Sure. So one of the things that happens with succession planning, a key aspect of it, is we take a look at what are the kinds of skills, what are the kinds of competencies that leaders need to be effective in the future. Because one leader's skill set and development set might be different, or might require different skills going into the future. So if you have a succession planning process in place, then you can put in, like the leader that you mentioned, maybe he could have had the opportunity to develop some more skills so he could reach a broad constituency and he'd be more effective. So maybe, again, like you said, he was the #1 yes man, or maybe he was a strong arm man or whatever. So he had those skills, but there were other skills like emotional intelligence, contextual competence that he didn't have. But if he had had the chance to develop that, then the country and the situation would be a lot more involved.
Of course, in that party earlier, there were some capable men, but they challenged him, and then he cut them out from the party, and he started to groom people who are supporters, who don't challenge him. That's pity, because, as an organization, as a nation, we have to be confident enough that we bring people who may challenge us, or people who may complement us, people that are very strong. So just for the sake of leading, alone and at the top, we should not really call out people who are competent enough, people who are challenging.
Right. In the field, there's a term they call, as far as succession is concerned, a lot of time leaders want to bring up someone who's a mini-me. That is someone who is just like them. But the requirements of change, the requirements of the future might not work as well. And that's why I mentioned earlier the conflict between two generations, because the baby boomer generation is so different from the millennial generation. You have a greater level of technology sophistication in the millennial generation, but they don't have, again, the experience and the enterprise level knowledge and whatnot. So the ideal situation would be to bring those two together. Okay, but very often it just is a one-off situation, and that's a detriment. There's another aspect of that I'd like to talk about as well. In the early 2000s, when we first became aware of a situation around the challenge of succession planning, I mapped out 3 scenarios of how it could play out. The first scenario that I mapped out I called the gray wave, and that meant that individuals would be leaving the workplace at an incredible rate. This is the baby boomers, and because they'd be leaving at such an incredible rate, that there wouldn't be enough time to develop successors in place. And that, of course, would have a major impact on the workplace and, on the country as well, and actually have international repercussions. The second scenario that I looked at what I call the gray ceiling, and that's taking it's the name from the glass ceiling. But in the gray ceiling, you have all these baby boomers that are staying in positions even long after they're eligible to retire, so people under them are not able to get the experience that they need. Okay, and again, that be detrimental. And then the third scenario is kind of like a percolating situation, and you see the rise of the millennials, which is happening right now. They're coming into position, sometimes not with the adequate resources, sometimes restructuring coming on. So again, kind of I'd say a dissidence as far as bringing together the skill sets and the needs for leadership in organizations. So I think, again, if you're looking at the situation strategically, you have to be aware of that. And each organization has its own specific situation. Some organizations, they have that gray wave going, and so they've got a lot of young people in leadership position, but they're still learning. Just like the example you gave about the leader. Other organizations, they're having a totally different situation in that they got people who are stuck who've been in positions for 30 years. Now they're moving into 40 years. And so they're not thinking and they're not having a lot of innovation and, using technology as well as they can. So the organization is not being that effective. So again, we need a combination of those. And that's why you need, again, someone who can think further down the road, can look at things strategically, and think about what are the needs of the enterprise and how things are changing and how they can implement change. Because the whole area of change management is very, very challenging in and of itself, because with change comes resistance. Okay, I mean, if you notice, on a personal level, if you want to change your habit, it's that resistance that you have from comfortable with the way things are. And so if you multiply that among people, it's a big, big deal. And what happens very often is sometimes you have leaders that have the right ideas and the right things going forward, but they're talking about change to make people uncomfortable. Okay, and so sometimes they're not able to implement those changes. So that's why it's important in succession planning that you have the kind of leaders that have a full level of communication and influence skills so they can move in the right direction. So they're not just a technological person, a person that's just one-off that knows how to, do things, perhaps be a micromanager, but can look at the big picture and also implement the details as well.
Yeah, I hear you saying that organizations should be intentional about succession plan. They should be proactive, and also they should take it as a very important strategic competency for the organization. And also, you're saying that senior leaders, they should be selfless, because it requires for you to think selflessly to raise successors.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that we stress when we're working with senior leaders is to ask them to think about what legacy would they like to leave to their organization. Would they like to leave an organization that's in disarray a year or two after, or would they like to leave an organization that's dynamic, that's moving forward, that's growing, based on the the work that they've done, kind of like a gardener that's, plants the seeds and the plant grows out and becomes beautiful and continues to bring joy to not only to the gardener but to the people in the community. So I think that's what most people want to do, but sometimes, again, they're so busy with day-to-day things, they don't take the time to do that.
So we have been talking about why succession is very important, and also we talked about some of the requirements to have a very successful succession plan. Let's talk about the pitfalls organizations should avoid. I have read from your book about the pitfalls. Would you please share with us a couple of these pitfalls?
Sure. And by the way, there are some slides that I'd like to share as well. But as far as pitfalls are concerned, well, we've talked about some of them. One of the pitfalls, if we don't have the support of the senior management, it's not going to really be successful. And that's really important. Another pitfall, I think, that I didn't mention that's really important is that people have to feel empowered throughout the organization. Succession plan. If succession planning is viewed as something that's just for an elite few, then it's not going to, it's not going to be successful in that organization. People are going to say, oh, well, these are the chosen ones or whatever. Kind of like if, you just bring up someone for your family. So you want to make sure that you provide development and advancement for people, because one of the things that we see right now in the millennial generations and Generation X and Y, that is a generation prior to them, is they have really good skills, technological skills, but sometimes they'll leave organizations before they're able to mature because there's no career advancement. So that is one of the most important things that you want to do in your succession planning. You want to make sure that you don't just zero in on a small group of people, but it's throughout the organization. We also mentioned earlier about another pitfall in an organization is that they don't provide the kinds of resources for the development of successors. That is, they don't provide development assignments. Some organizations, they have leadership development programs that lead to going to classroom training and those kinds of situations, which are great. That can expose people to new ideas. But the rubber hits the road when you have actual experience. Just like you mentioned earlier, where people can take risks, when they can learn, they have coaches to help them learn from their experiences. So when they move into that next position, they have the kind of thinking skill, the kind of people skills that they'll be effective. So sometimes the planning piece is in place, but the development piece is not in place. And you need both of them in order for an organization to be successful. And one of the aspects of that that cuts across that is the competency models that I mentioned. The competency models help you identify the skills that you need now and going into the future. So you have to do, in order for succession planning to be successful, you have to do what's called an environmental scan. Okay, that environmental scan is not just a snapshot of now, but where do we want to go, and what are the factors in the environment that are influencing us. So, and what are some scenarios and how we can react to that. So those are some of the things that the challenges that organizations face sometimes that they're not able to overcome. They don't take the time to devote the resources that they need. Their leadership development program might not be as effective to put leaders in the situations where they can have the skills in problem solving, emotional intelligence, etc., so they can be effective leaders, and then you see really poor results.
From the book, I have also read some pitfalls.
Yes.
These pitfalls, for example, pitfall 1, it says the like me bias. Talk to me about that.
That's the mini me situation. We've seen a lot of work in interpersonal relationships, in areas around diversity and whatnot. People have a natural affinity to relate to people in their own group that they feel comfortable with.
And they want to bring people like them.
That's
right.
why
it is like me bias.
That's right.
And that is really a devastating kind of effect on their organization, because you can bring the person who's look like you, but he may not be the right fit to succeed you.
right? There's the other part to that too. When you have people that have all of those similarities, they look alike, they think alike, you have very often what's called groupthink. They have a closed perspective, and that works against innovation and creativity, which organizations need nowadays, especially to use technology and to take advantage. If you think about some of the challenges that government organizations face now, unprecedented challenges as far as security is concerned, Ebola, SARS. We didn't even know about these diseases years ago. And so there's not one playbook or one manual that you can go and pull out the answer to these. You need leaders that can bring people together and can really be effective in addressing these issues. So that's another area why succession planning is important.
Yeah, pitfall number 2 is the like us bias.
Like us bias.
Yeah. This is about group thinking and...
Right, exactly. And I talked a little bit about that already. But when people have that same point of view, that same worldview, then they tend to shut out other important things, other indicators in the environment that things are changing. That's why there's been so many books out about the top 500 firms in whatever, but they find that over years those firms tend to change because again you have a leadership that'll have that'll have that bias. They all think together and whatnot. They're not able to continuously interact with the environment and come up with new and creative ideas, and so they tend to bring into their circle people who think like them. So again, it's very similar to the mini-me. Mini-me is people who almost look like you, etc. That particular situation is people who, right, like maybe like in America, people who all went to Harvard, or all people went to Penn State or whatever. So they all have a certain mindset, if you will, and that again has its advantages as far as them working together, but it limits them as far as seeing the big picture.
Yeah, pitfall number 3 is past performance will always guarantee future success. This is also one of the pitfalls.
It certainly is, and I mentioned that earlier too. What you're talking about is most organizations have a performance management system, okay? And so a person might be a high performer given a limited scope of duties and responsibilities. Yes. Right. But that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to develop the kinds of skills that they have the aptitude to be successful going on. You've probably heard situations where individuals are micromanagers, okay? They're not able to let go of the work, okay? So they keep staying on top of people, and they're not able to inspire people, to bring group of people together to move forward collectively to goals and objectives. Those are some of the things that true leaders need to do, and that's what makes them able to be in organizations and stay there for long periods of time and help that organization move forward.
Let's move to the how part.
Okay.
So far we have been talking about the why part, which is to provide some background information about succession plan. And now we have been talking about the what part. Now let's talk about the action part, the how part. For example, how can organizations design their succession plan? Are there step-by-step?
Sure, great question. In fact, I've got a slide on that. I'll move right to it. So this is a model for succession planning. One of the first things we already talked about is you got to get that commitment from the leaders. Then the other thing is you got to have a business case. What are you trying to accomplish as far as succession planning? What are your program goals? Then what you want to do is you want to understand what the competency levels are. What are the competency model is and what particular skill level that you need there. And then what you want to see is where are the gaps between what people have now in your workforce and where you need them to go if they're going to be effective leaders. And then the next question is how do you close that gap? So
would you please a little bit explain about this OPM succession planning model?
Sure.
About the model.
Okay, so OPM stands for the Office of Personnel Management, and that's the personnel arm of the United States government, and they have their own succession planning model. So this is what I was referring to, and for those of you who get a copy of the slides, that information will be there. So the model, as you can see on the outside of it, is circular, okay? And the inside of it, it has some key areas that you have to give some attention to. So we mentioned some of the key areas that are in the middle of it, the leader commitment, the clear program goals, and the employee commitment to learning. Those are the foundations, okay? You've got to build your house of succession planning on those three things, okay? In addition to that, you have to link your succession planning to the strategic goals of the organization, okay? That's one of the things that doesn't happen very often. So a lot of times, managers or executives don't see the value of succession plan because it's not linked to the goals that they're operating on. But if you just point out is whatever goal you have, whether it's technology, legal, or whatever, if you don't have the right people, it's not going to happen. You need not only people with skills, you need leaders to make sure that you get the results and outcome that you're looking for. So we want to look at that. Then we want to make sure that we analyze the gaps, as I pointed out, between where you are now and where you want to be at. And then you want to make sure that you develop the kinds of succession strategies that's relevant and that's tailorized for your specific organization. So one organization, like a government organization, might not do the same thing as far as succession planning as, let's say, a private sector organization or a nonprofit. So it has to be something that's carefully calibrated to get the kind of results that you need. And then you want to make sure that you have the expertise, you have the commitment and the will to implement that program. And so then the final, not the final step is, but coming back around, you want to evaluate your results. You started out with some goals and objectives. Okay, how well did we do? Okay, how can we improve? How can we make things better? How can we cut costs? Okay, what are the people that are in the program doing? What are they saying? And what have we learned from this experience? Okay, and then you feed that. You continue to feed that into the program. So succession planning is really one of continuous learning. The organization is learning, and people are learning as well.
So it's a continuous process. So let's assume that some of our audience, they have community organizations, businesses, and so on. And some of them, of course, may have succession plan. That's great. But some of them, they may not have. Or they have, but it's not that much effective. So how can they develop their capacity to develop their succession plan?
How can they develop their capacity? Well, we talked a little bit about that earlier. One is you want to make sure that you think about, what your strategic needs of your organization is. If you don't have a strategic perspective of your organization, then it'll be really a challenge to develop succession planning. Because succession planning, in one way, it takes your human capital management and it ties it to your strategic planning. So you want to make sure you're doing that. Make sure that you're not just dealing with a crisis management mode. You want to make sure that you're able to develop a sense of urgency around your succession planning, okay? So that means that the top person in your organization really needs to have the information and the will to go about doing that. Just like I gave you the example of the individuals, the chief financial officer that left. All organizations at some period of time have incurred some kind of challenge with succession planning. I've seen some organizations that have high-level positions in some of those areas, as I mentioned, like finance, technology, human resources, and it's like a revolving door. A person comes in 2 years, 3 years, they're out again. Another person comes in 2. That's because they haven't done succession planning. The person that comes into the organization doesn't, takes time to find out the culture of the organization. They might be unsuccessful in implementing that. And think about the negative impact that has throughout the organization in a high visible, high profile position. Not very good. So one of the main things that they have to do, any organization, if they're thinking about doing succession planning, is make sure that you're able to look at your organization strategically, not just part of your organization, but across the enterprise, across the entire organization. And that the other aspect of that is that you involve your stakeholders, your key stakeholders, in conversations about where you are now and where you want to be. That gives you a really good foundation so that you can align that with your succession planning goals and objectives. Now, you cannot effectively do succession planning without that expertise, because what's going to happen is It's going to take a lot of time, as I mentioned, to develop and train a person to do succession planning, and then they still have to learn the different nuances, how to customize succession planning in your organization. So if they're thinking about doing that, then getting that expertise is really another important component of what they want to be looking at. Now, a lot of professional organizations do provide some resources, some training, information on that, so that's one way to go. But again, that's not going to bring you a whole picture, but it'll help you move forward in that direction.
So if I summarize what you said, is very important, first of all, the organization, of course, to develop their capacity to have a very effective succession planning is, first of all, to commit themselves, to enter into a sense of urgency, saying that succession plan is very important for the long-term success of the organization. Even if they are busy, even if they have scarce resources, they have to spend a little bit time and also a little bit budget on succession plan. And the second one, as you said, is tying up. They have to tie it with their strategic goals. If they don't tie it with their strategic goals, especially the top leadership, they're not motivated to do it because their success is measured based on how much they are successful in achieving their strategic goals. And the third one you mentioned about developing their capacity in terms of knowledge, like they have to research, maybe interview and learn from other people who have successful succession plans, go to the library, buy books like this one, study, even invite other consultants to come and help them. And of course, they can make their organization a learning organization. In that case, they always learn as new things show up and so on and so forth. And obviously, they have to practice, implement it, and learn from their experience, make it better, and so on and so forth. As time is going, I would like to talk about how organizations actually develop their successors. So far, we are talking about the process. Let's talk about the people. How can they develop their successors? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One of the challenges, I think, in succession planning is concerned is once they go through the process of developing a competency model, selecting who will be in the program and whatnot, then comes the other part, which you call where the rubber hits the road. That is actually, as you said, developing the successors. Now, how do you go about doing that? Well, first of all, you need some resources, okay? Not the resources, though, that people traditionally think of. Okay, they traditionally think of succession planning. They think of people going to classroom training or whatever, maybe going to Harvard Business School or whatever. Here, you've got Georgetown University and getting some classes in leadership. Very good situations, but that is not the entire picture. Okay, people need to have the experiences that's going to make them successful in leadership positions in the workplace. So one tool that organizations can think about is developing what's called developmental assignments or rotational assignments, where they get a chance to actually take on some of the challenges the senior leaders do, okay, and take risks, okay, make mistakes, and they can learn from those mistakes if they have a coach that'll work with them. So having developmental opportunities, having a coach to work with them. Some organizations have mentors for leaders, so that's another important aspect of it too. So they can help, so the new leaders coming in can help understand the organizational culture and make decisions that are more helpful for their personal development. Those are really good things that they can do. Another tool that's been used is called action learning. Action learning is when a group of individuals come together. They might be across the organization, across the enterprise, and they come and they tackle a problem. Okay, they work together. They develop team building skills. They develop the kinds of skills to actually make recommendations, and then in some cases actually implement a solution. So that way they develop their skills of influence and interaction, and also their skills in problem solving, decision making, so they can be effective within that organization's culture. So what we're talking about essentially is, what are those practical things that people can do? Not just theoretically up here, but what are the practical things that they can do in the organization? And that's why you want to have a competency model, because you make an assessment of the individual in the competency model. Where are their strengths? Okay, for example, some organizations are very centralized. They have one centralized headquarters, okay? But they have offices all around the country, okay, out in the field. So if you have a person that just comes from the central office and whatnot, they don't understand the differences, okay, that people out in the field have. They don't understand how, in the field offices, how they interact successfully with their environment. Okay, because we know in major cities it's a lot different than it is in rural areas. Okay, and the same thing, if a person's in a rural area, they might not understand what's happening in the main office, those headquarters. So if you're developing a succession planning program, you want to make sure that a person has those kind of experiences so they can navigate the cultural differences throughout the organization. So they can have a larger perspective and they can be successful. So those are some of the things that you want to look at. Quality experiences, not just textbook learning, and the kind of experiences practical that understands the regional, the cultural differences in the organization so they can be successful.
I like the examples you have given. I can share my experience with reading the book of the autobiography of Jack Welch, who was a former CEO and president of General Electric. He talked about the succession plan of GE. He said that, for example, the incumbent CEO, he helped 3 successors. He notified to the board of directors, hey, these are the 3 guys I have selected to succeed me, and I'm going to test them, I'm going to develop them, and finally I will make a decision to pick one of them. The 3 of them, they know that they are picked as successors, but they know that one of them will be the successor of the CEO and the president. And he discussed about the kind of things they do to develop and also test and see who should succeed the incumbent, the contemporary CEO. And I remember they give them, for example, they give them one organization to lead, one business to lead, and see how they succeed. So that's a practical way of exposing these successors to practice and see how they succeed. The other thing I have seen is that they ask them some tough questions. I remember one of the questions. For example, the CEO, the current CEO, the one who will be substituted, he will pick one of them. He will take them with the plane of the organization. And on the air, he asked that person. He asked each one of them to see who they respect. So, for example, they ask, if this plane crashes today, you and me, the current CEO, die, who do you want to succeed this organization? From the guys, on the ground, the 2 guys. So to see which one, among the 2, this person respects is very important, because they are trying to see with which successors he want to work. Let's say if they pick this guy, they want to know whom he respects and also to see with whom he doesn't want to work. So that if they select him, they make sure that if he doesn't respect, let's say, one of them, that guy may be asked to leave the organization. So you can see that they provide them opportunities to practice. Mm-hmm. They ask them tough questions. See also beyond, that moment where they select the successor. They want to see how he could be able to succeed beyond that moment by bringing the right people next to him so that he may succeed, or by taking away people who may not complement him, people who may not team up and work successfully with him.
Great examples. Yes, thank you. Yes, that really brings to the fore what we're talking about as far as succession planning is concerned. Exactly.
Dear our viewers, this is our hope that you enjoyed our discussion. We have been talking about the importance of succession plan, why it is important, what you should do, and also how to develop your succession plan and also successors. And this is our hope that you have learned something, because your future, the future of your organization is dependent on your successors, and you have to develop your successors. A leader without a successor is a failure, so you don't want to be a failure. Hope you enjoyed our discussion. I'm thankful to James, who is a consultant and also the co-author of the book. On behalf of ISAT and our viewers, thank you very much for coming, James.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.